Hello and welcome to my climate justice presentation on food security work in Lower Nyando, Kenya. My name is Gabriel Kitsos. So most of my research comes from the article Empowering a Local Community to Address Climate Risks and Food Insecurity in Lower Nyando, Kenya. In this article, it discusses several organizations, but the main focus is Friends of Katak Odeo, which is an umbrella organization with 6 self-help groups affiliated with it, part of it, where households in the region join and contribute money. And this organization works with other say government extension agents or research development partners that are also listed below. And to do the work that they do in combating food insecurity and climate change and how that's affecting the livelihoods of people in Lower Nyando, Kenya. So, what is the purpose of these organizations? Well, these groups are concerned with adaptation, mitigation, and communication. In adaptation and adapting to the changing climate, they work in crop diversification. So there are several new crops being introduced to farms in the region, such as certain kinds of peas, pigeon peas, sweet potatoes, and things like that that will supplement the traditional crops of the area, such as like maize, cassava, and bean staples. There's some more high value crops and some crops that do better in the changing and future climates. There's also mitigation. So in efforts to reduce and prevent the emission of greenhouse gases, there is agroforestry work being done by these groups. So partnerships have supported tree nurseries, and some of them are owned by these self-help groups. And more than 50,000 high-quality tree seedlings have been produced, and each are valuable and worth money, so helping the livelihoods and creating sources of income as well, and also taking CO2 out of the air and mitigating climate change. And then there's also, of course, communication, which is a huge part of climate change communication is encouraging group participation. And with this, households are encouraged to join these self-help groups and become part of a community that's in a lot of communication. And then those groups are then also in communication with other governmental agencies and organizations. So it creates a lot of conversation and communication through many different groups, communicating about climate change. So why is this an example of climate justice? So the CDC definition of climate justice is all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, are entitled to an equal protection from environmental and health hazards caused by climate change and equal access to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So in Lower Nyando, Kenya people are disproportionately affected by climate change and disproportionately vulnerable to climate change, especially in terms of agriculture, where both droughts and floods are common, and the percent of households that are unable to meet their needs for food for certain parts of the year is also high, as is malnutrition. And this also causes high poverty. And then there's disease, which also makes livelihoods more difficult in terms of being vulnerable to climate change effects in the area. So, what is the significance of this work? Why, in my opinion, does this case matter? So there are several reasons I think why this is significant. Number one, it improves livelihoods in a long-term way. So, for example, the Ministry of Livestock Development and World Neighbors started working with these self-help groups. And one of the things they did in this example is introduce better beehives and train farmers to be more productive at keeping bees and producing honey and whatnot. And and so this is kind of a kind of a long-term way that also creates more resilience to climate change and its effects in the region, such as droughts and floods, and creates a more resilient community that is vulnerable to climate change. Um, it also shows this work shows the effectiveness of different people with different expertise working in collaboration together towards a common goal, which because there's people from kind of different areas of expertise kind of collaborating to help in this area, such as people being knowing how to train people how to farm certain things in certain ways. And then also people working with the funding and whatnot. And in this way, it also shows the effective use of umbrella organizations where households can kind of contribute and then be a part of like a larger organization that will kind of in turn kind of help them and protect them and make them less vulnerable to climate change. And lastly, I think that this is very significant work because in the process of improving the lives of people in Lower Neando, um, it also is mitigating climate change with while also being less vulnerable to it in the crops and the trees that are being planted um, in larger numbers now. Yeah. So these are my sources that I used. And also for the images underneath, this is where I found my images. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.